The call came at 2:17 a.m., the hour for worst-case scenarios. A sheriff from a county we'd never driven through told me they'd found my husband's car at the bottom of a ravine. Crumpled. Burnt. No survivors. Identification found on scene. I remember the silence in my throat, like my lungs forgot how to make sound. They asked if I could confirm the name. I did. They expected sobbing. Collapse. A widow's wail. But I was still cold, quietly suspicious. Because only a week before, I'd found something. A withdrawal. 5 figures. Gone from our joint account. A few days before that, an envelope hidden in his closet with names I didn't recognize, offshore addresses scribbled on post-it notes. He'd told me he was consolidating debt, cleaning things up. But the timing and now this crash? Something wasn't right. They said his body was too damaged for an open casket. No autopsy needed. They were certain it was him. I insisted. A formality, I said. Closure. But inside, I already knew. The debt collectors came before the funeral. So did the lawyers. He owed everyone. He had borrowed against the house, maxed out cards I never knew existed, and used my signature, poorly forged, on documents I'd never seen. What little was left in our accounts went to legal fees and settlements. He didn't just die. He tried to bury me with him. But I wasn't grieving anymore. I was hunting. I started quietly. Old emails, deleted texts I recovered from backups. Then deeper. Account numbers, purchase histories, login attempts. I found a chain of small transactions leading offshore. The pattern was clumsy but deliberate. There were aliases. One in Belize. One in Cyprus. Another in the Caribbean under a company name that didn't exist. He'd planned this. He hadn't just disappeared. He had rebranded. I didn't go to the press. I didn't alert the authorities. Not yet. Because a part of me wanted something more precise than justice. I didn't want him dragged back. I wanted him erased. I wanted choice in how this story ended, not just for him, but for me. So I started tracing the money. And I started planning my trip. The deeper I dug, the clearer the truth became. He hadn't just fled. He'd engineered his escape. And not alone. The first offshore account I tracked was in St. Kitts. The name attached to Gregory Dane meant nothing at first. But the birth date listed matched his down to the hour. I cross-referenced it with travel logs, digital footprints. There was a private charter ticket from Miami to Basse-Terre the day after his accident. Purchased in cash. Passenger manifest listed Gregory Dane and a woman named Sienna Ray. I didn't know her. Not yet. But I would. My former husband had created a life beyond consequence. A tropical version of himself without debt, without history. But he'd underestimated the reach of a woman scorned and financially ruined. While tracing the money, I rebuilt. I took on freelance work, quiet, steady. Consulting gigs I used to pass over when we lived comfortably. I sold what little jewelry I still owned. Not out of desperation, but because sentiment had become an anchor. Every ring, every watch, gone. Every trace of him that lived in my home was boxed, burned, or sold. His face vanished from my walls, my wallet, my devices. I didn't want reminders. I wanted leverage. I used a pseudonym, Eleanor Black, to make travel inquiries. I opened an account under the name. Bought a burner phone. Booked a ticket with layovers so tangled it looked like a bad mistake. But it wasn't. It was deliberate. I didn't want him to see me coming. Because I wasn't going there to beg. I was going there to watch. He had drained every account, left me with debt in my name, and a funeral that cost more than the ashes in the urn. I owed him nothing. Not grief. Not recognition. Not confrontation. But I needed to see him. One last time. To confirm he was still the same coward who ran, dressed in a new tan and someone else's last name. Before I left, I rewrote my will. Left letters with my lawyer. Gave one trusted friend a sealed envelope and instructions. If I don't come back, open this. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood what people like him do when cornered. Charm, lie, manipulate, destroy. I was no longer a woman he could seduce. I arrived in Basse-Terre just after noon on a Wednesday. The sun was brutal, the air sticky with salt and secrecy. I stayed in a small guest house outside the main resort district, low profile, cash paid. I walked the streets, slow and observing, for 3 days. On the 4th day, I saw him. Taller than I remembered, or maybe just thinner. Lighter hair. A goatee now. But the posture, the smile, the smugness, it was him. He wore linen and sunglasses. Beside him, laughing too loudly, was Sienna Ray. Younger. Tan. Expensive taste. He was alive. And he looked happy. I didn't follow him. Not yet. I just watched. I memorized. He kissed her on the street like a man with no past. They shopped for wine and candles. They walked like tourists but lived like locals. He paid with a card tied to an account I'd already flagged. I could have exposed him that moment. Walked up, dropped his name, demanded answers, drawn a crowd. But I didn't. Because I wasn't here to confront him. I was here to decide, do I resurrect him, or let him stay dead? And that night, as I stood by the open window of my room, listening to waves crash against a shore he now called home, I knew. I wasn't going to ruin his new life. I was going to erase his old one completely, including the part that tied me to him. I flew home 3 days later, and no one knew I'd ever left. No dramatic airport confrontation. No tipping off authorities. Just silence. Calculated, purposeful silence. Because I hadn't gone to bring him back. I want to make sure he stayed gone. The first thing I did was shut down every door he could still crawl through. I closed joint accounts, filed formal affidavits attesting to his presumed death, and had his name removed from every shared record, utilities, insurance, even the lease on the storage unit he left behind. I shredded every document he'd ever signed in our home, except the ones that gave me power. And then I leaned into the fiction he created. I became a widow. Publicly. Legally. Socially. The insurance companies accepted the crash report. The forensic review had been thorough, and his personal effects were found on site. There was no reason for them to doubt the story. I claimed the life insurance, not out of greed, but justice. It was money he intended to steal. I let it be the first brick in a wall he couldn't climb over. I filed bankruptcy next. Voluntary. Strategic. My lawyer helped me sever his debts from my name, citing identity theft, forged documents, and financial abuse. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. And by the end of that long, quiet month, I had done what he never expected. I had rebuilt. Without him. Because of him. In spite of him. I rented a small cottage on the coast, not luxurious, not flashy. But every square foot was mine. I furnished it simply. I painted one wall blue, ocean deep, and filled the space with light. My days became rhythmic. Coffee at sunrise. Long walks. Books I'd always meant to read. I wasn't healing. I was reclaiming. I didn't track him again. I didn't need to. I let him live that life, thinking he'd outsmarted everyone. Meanwhile, I lived mine like a woman who'd died once, and come back meaner, smarter, freer. But the final cut came 6 months later. A letter arrived from a small law firm in Miami. It was addressed to the estate of Michael Ray Hollowell, my husband's real name. The letter detailed an inquiry into a debt settlement dispute between one of his former creditors and a trust I'd never heard of. But the key line was this: we are attempting to reach the surviving spouse listed on file for verification. I paused. Read it again. Surviving spouse. It wasn't me. He had tried to marry her. Whether under a fake name or through forged documents, I didn't know. But the arrogance of it, trying to build a new life atop the wreckage of mine. Sparked a cold, focused rage I hadn't felt in months. So I wrote back. Formal. Precise. With attached death certificate, sworn affidavits, and every legal document that made it clear Michael Ray Hollowell no longer existed. Not on paper. Not in banks. Not in any system that could recognize him. If he wanted a legal identity again, he'd have to resurrect himself. And if he did, he'd be met with charges. Fraud. Desertion. Theft. A financial paper trail long enough to wrap around his neck. I signed the letter and included one line at the end. The man you're looking for is dead. I buried him myself. That night, I slept better than I had in years. I didn't plan to see him again. But some stories write their own final scene. It happened nearly a year after the crash. I was in Belize not for him, but for me. A quiet trip to sign a publishing deal, ironic given the manuscript, widow by choice. The book was part memoir, part instruction manual. A story of betrayal, deception, and the decisions women make when the world expects them to shatter. My editor wanted photos by the coast. The photographer recommended a small bay near a private marina, less crowded, more intimate. We arrived just before sunset, the sky washing everything in bronze. And there he was, standing near a white-sailed boat, laughing too loud, arm wrapped around the waist of a woman in a gauzy dress. Sienna. The one from the manifest. His skin darker now, hair shorter, but still him, same smirk, same false confidence. He didn't see me at first. I should have walked away. I almost did. But then he looked up. And our eyes met. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, the world slowed. His face registered disbelief, then fear, then something desperate, like a man staring at his own ghost. He took a step forward, hand half raised. I raised a hand. But not to wave. To end it. I turned my back. And walked away. No confrontation. No revenge speech. No courtroom scene. Just my silence. And the sound of everything he'd built cracking behind me. He didn't follow. He couldn't. Because what could he say? He had faked his death. Robbed me blind. Started a new life with a new name, convinced I was grieving and broke. And now I stood before him, alive, untouched, radiant. I gave him no closure. No drama. I left him standing in a place where he once felt safe. And I took that from him, too. Back at the hotel, I poured a glass of wine and watched the sea dissolve into darkness. Not out of triumph. But clarity. He could keep his lie. I didn't want to drag him back. I wanted him forgotten. The next morning, I sent a final email to my lawyer. One sentence. Terminate all trace. He's not my past. He's not even real. And with that, I deleted his name from every place it still lived. Social media, contact lists, blocked numbers, backup files. I didn't tell anyone I saw him. Not even my closest friends. Because that moment wasn't about sharing. It was about sealing. I had stood in front of the man who tried to kill his name and take mine with it. And I made sure mine survived. I wasn't his wife anymore. I wasn't his victim. I was the ghost who walked away. And that haunted him more than any headline ever could. I never said his name again. Not to a friend. Not to a lawyer. Not to myself. It became the first rule of my new life. I would not carry what tried to bury me. By the time the book was published, I was no longer introduced as widowed. I wasn't asked what happened. People knew better. The women who read my story saw themselves in it, not in the specifics, but in the surrender. The clarity. The decision to survive without reconciliation. I spoke at 2 conferences that year. One was about narrative ownership. The other was titled The Power of Leaving Without Closure. I told the audience that you don't owe your ghosts a eulogy. Some things deserve silence more than ceremony. I didn't relive the night I saw him. I didn't include that part in the book. Because the real ending didn't happen on a dock. It happened the moment I chose not to speak his name again. Instead, I filled my world with new names, names of women who rose, who rebuilt, who stayed silent not out of fear but choice. We shared strategies, not just stories. We met in living rooms and conference calls. Some had been abandoned. Some cheated on. Some defrauded like me. What we had in common wasn't pain. It was what we did with it. I bought land outside the city. Just 2 acres wooded, with a small cottage and an art studio. I painted. Badly. I grew herbs. I swam in silence. The kind of silence I used to be afraid of. Now it was the best part of my day. Love didn't become a priority. Not because I was bitter. Because I had no room for anything that diluted my peace. Once, a man asked me at a dinner party what happened to my husband. I looked at him calmly and said, he left. And I left it there. I had no need to tell anyone I buried a man who still breathed. Because in my story, he was already gone. Some stories don't end with justice and handcuffs. Some end with freedom in a garden, a password changed, a life rewritten with nobody's permission. He may still be out there, wearing linen, pouring wine, pretending to be someone he isn't. But I don't think about him anymore. I don't wonder if he regrets it. I don't wish him ill. I wish him nothing. That's what true erasure looks like. That's the ending most men like him never see coming. He faked his death. She buried his name. If you love stories where revenge is clever, cold, and devastating, subscribe. These aren't just betrayals. They're blueprints for taking your power back. And the next twist is one you won't see coming.